So the cool thing about the Tesla roof is it sheds the snow immediately. That's the good and the bad. So the good is your roof's going to make power all year long.
And why is that? Is it the viscosity or not viscosity?
It's just that it's kind of smooth enough and it's black and it produces power, so it does get a little warm. Whereas normal solar panels have a ledge, so you have your roof that's going to have, potentially, asphalt shingles, so that's going to hold snow, and then your panels are sitting up over it. And so when it snows, that just sits there. And so you might get coverage on a residential regular roof for January and February.
Interesting.
But Tesla, like the minute the snow's done, it's going to shed. So the good and the bad of that is, the good is you get solar and you have a clean roof all winter. The bad is it sheds. And so we've had some existing homes that weren't thinking about that, have avalanches right over their front door, their back patio. So we put up snow guards in those situations.
Today on the podcast, we had Paul Krumrich from Greenway Solar, Spy, and Donkey Label on. And I've known Paul for about a year, and you can tell just some of the stories that we share. They get pretty deep and personal, but you've really just got two business owners going back and forth with a speed ping pong and Red Bull. And it is a great episode. A lot about, towards the end of the episode, just about really the pitfalls all entrepreneurs fall into as you hire and you have to fire people, and just the learning curves that we all have to do in order to run our businesses. You're going to love this episode. Without further ado, here's Paul Krumrich. Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, I've got Paul Krumrich in the studio. He is the owner-operator of Greenway Solar, Spy, and Donkey Label. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So clearly a serial entrepreneur, or a high case of ADHD. How did you come to own and operate three separate companies? Couldn't you settle just on one?
That's a good story. And my wife would also agree that one would be better than three.
Well, I think for the listeners out there, we'll talk mostly about Greenway Solar because that applies mostly to the building. I mean, frankly, they all do. But I mean, it is a legitimate question. I'm just very... Anytime an entrepreneur has more than one, it's always there's a story, and it's sort of just interesting how they evolve. So how'd you get here? How did you get evolved to owning three companies here?
Yeah, first I'll give you a quick joke that I heard on the last trip we were on, which was the kid in the pool said, "Hey, do you know what HD is?" I went to the doctor and he said I had 80 of them. So that made me think of myself. But yeah, my story to get here was my dad was a shop teacher. My mom was a math teacher. Grew up building things my whole life. Didn't know what to do at college, so went for engineering. Graduated from the U. Had a job. They moved me into sales because they're like, "You're an okay engineer, but you're probably better at talking to people." And then ended up getting laid off in 2000 during the telecom, when the telecom boom happened, and then died. And ended up just trying to figure out what to do with my life. Took like eight months off. Got rid of my cell phone. Got rid of all expenses.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're single at this time, no family?
Yep. Remain single, because when I'd be on blind dates, people would say, "So what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, unemployed." They're like, "Are you looking?" I'm like, "Nope." I just figured that like taking a vacation at 22 for 8 months is a rare thing to do. And then when I went back, I ended up getting this job where I went to Anaheim for a trade show, and we had this cool screen that was on our table for the trade show, and everyone kept coming up to me and asking what the screen was, not what the product was we were selling. And so I took a bunch of business cards. And, just because I had like 20 business cards of people that wanted that screen, came back to Minneapolis, found out where the screen was made. It was a 3M product. No one was doing anything with it. And then just said, okay, I'm going to start doing this in my basement.
That's awesome.
And then ended up with Spy, so the evolution of that product became a rear projection film that you could use to make big screens back in, 2000 when an LCD didn't exist. Plasmas were $100,000 for big ones. And so we started that way, which was more in line with like my background of product design or engineering. And then that evolved into Spy, which is a commercial AV integrator. And then I guess to get back to your question, like, why did I start another one? Like my either superpower or stupidity is when I see a mountain that I think I can climb, like I go climb it.
Oh, 100%. Because it's there.
Yeah. And just I know I can do it.
Yep.
And it's probably not maybe the smartest thing, but if I think I can do it, I'm going to go do it. And so Spy's evolution was we wanted to put all this cool technology in our building to show it off, but we didn't want to do it in a building we were renting. And so we ended up buying a building. Then we tricked out the building to have all the Spy cool stuff so we could bring architects in to show them. Half the building was unused, and we ended up leasing that to a company that wanted to produce solar panels. in Minnesota. There was a Made in Minnesota solar program.
I remember that. Was
Yep.
that like 2009, 10?
Yep.
Somewhere in there?
And so what happened there, which is interesting, is it was a 10-year guaranteed program that somehow got chopped in year 3. So like 10 years to incentivize companies to come to Minnesota and build solar panels. Washington, or go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's so funny you said. There was I dated a girl at that time from Washington. Her dad knew a guy in Minnesota who was trying to see if I would, because building was really slow for me at that time.
Yeah.
And he called me and said, "Do you want to get into solar? I have a solar hookup." I'll tell you what, after this podcast, I'll reach out to it. I'd be curious to know if it's the guy you bought.
I bet you it was, because they just leased the building for me, because my CTO at the time from SPY lived in Washington. He used to work for 3M. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to introduce you to this company. They want to rent space." And then after they couldn't find anyone to run the business. So then he called me back, said, "Would you just do it?"
So that was that would have been me.
Yeah, we would have met.
That's wild.
We would have met years ago.
No way.
So the company was iTech. It was a Washington-based solar company. And so we started helping them and managing that business of building panels.
Yeah.
And then I had, part of my job for them was going around to all the solar companies and selling them the panels.
So you're doing B&D for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then we learned the manufacturing, we learned all the stuff. And then people started coming to me and saying, "Hey, Paul, would you help with this project?" And then that's where I didn't like actively do an MBA. Should I go into solar? But I was asked to do it. My mind was like, this is the future. Why wouldn't I? And so that's how we ended up with Greenway. Oh,
there you go.
Yeah.
You can move the arm closer to it.
Okay, sorry. And so, that's how Greenway evolved, which was like...
Was it called Greenway? Did you end up buying it?
No, so iTech, which was the company we were running,
yeah,
the minute they pulled the program, was out of business, pulled stakes. And so
he just left then.
Gone. Like we were stuck with A, some debt, B, some panels, and a bunch of equipment to make solar panels.
This is even better. You didn't buy the business. It was basically just left there and be like, "See ya, here's some debt, do something with it."
Luckily, I had tried to get involved in it and they said no. So I was just an employee. So when they got toasted, we still had to deal with the stuff, but we just moved it out.
What year was that? Like 11 or 12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we leased that space up to a company, Track Club, that's now making merchandise and apparel there. But that was the foyer into solar. And so then we started doing more projects. That led to becoming the Tesla solar roof vendor for Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa.
And that was a big licensing deal. So at that time, how many other solar companies were in Minnesota?
There were some big companies in Minnesota doing traditional solar, and there's some that do commercial, some that do residential. We ended up saying, "Hey, no one's doing this Tesla product, and we're first to market with that."
And I was surprised because you hear about a lot of the stuff before it's available. And I never really looked into it, but it was always like, "Oh, Tesla has a shingle, but you can't get it. It's not available." And like that's still, in some ways, that comment still persists today.
Yeah.
And when you and I were chatting, we met, we'll talk a little bit about how we met maybe later in the podcast, but, I was asking you like, "Oh no, yeah, we can get it. We've been doing it for a while." And it's funny how, that's just marketing and publicity and bringing awareness, because it's interesting that false narrative very much pervades what builders. Do you find that when you call on builders and architects, you're like, "Oh, you can actually get this?"
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the biggest kind of frustrations. And I learned that early on with SPY initially, is 3M had this product. It was amazing. They didn't promote it. I was like, "Oh, there's a huge market and a huge potential," but it fell on us to promote this product, which is really expensive. Same thing with Tesla. I secret shopped the Tesla dealer the other day and I said, "Hey, just," even though I knew the answer, I'm like, "Can you get the Tesla solar?" If not, "No, not in the Midwest." And I was like, "We do it." Yeah. And we should know that. And so that's just the community that knows it the best. Now builders who have heard about it and heard it's not there, consumers that have, I thought it was coming, but it's not. So we're re-educating the market that it's even available. And so thanks for having me on here to
absolutely. And I want to dive pretty deep on Greenway and solar in particular, but going back to, you have a third company, which is the sexy sister company.
Yep.
That's a weird statement. I was going with something different in my mind. I'm not sure why that came out. A lot of people know you around the community. We met through a bunch of ultra athletes. You're a very competitive soccer player and ultra athlete. You still are. Tell us about how you created Donkey Label. For those listening, it's an incredible racewear for biking. It's incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Tell us how that originated.
So I, like you said, was a pretty big soccer player. At some point I got hurt to where I had double ankle surgery. So I was out of commission, and the rehab was swimming and biking. So the gateway drug to cycling is triathlon. And a lot of people have gone that path. And so that was kind of my rehab. Ended up getting into that, then ended up getting into kind of road
And what
cycling.
what year was this?
Probably 2005.
Okay, so this is
2000.
before Greenway Solar comes on.
Yep.
But right after this is after you've had your walkabout for 8 months and figured out what you're doing. So Spy is
Yeah, so
4 or 5 years in.
The walkabout was pre-Spy, so that was 2000.
Yep.
Spy was 2001.
Yep.
And then this was probably 2000. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe 2010.
Just trying to put this all together. Okay.
Yeah. And got pretty big into like cycling and thought it was cool. And then I remember for Christmas, I asked my wife to buy me this Rafa cool cross top. I think it was like $220. And so I got it, and it was tight, didn't really fit great, but I assumed, hey, it's made in England. It's really cool. And so then I started looking around. I found out it was made in China, and that it was like, okay, this is not fitting me very well because it's for like skinny English cyclists or whoever. And I'm, this American athlete that's got shoulders from swimming and all this stuff. And so again, a hill that I probably shouldn't have climbed, I was like, I think I can do this.
It makes logical sense.
Yeah. And I could do it in the States. And so,
or you could have just gotten a bigger size. The cheap, just to be clear, the cheap thing would have only cost you $200.
Right.
You know what? I will get a large instead of a medium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the
actually, you're right though. The English,
cost.
you're right about English though. I have is it a Barber jacket? And there's another one from England that I have this really cool vest. And I'm like a triple XL in it. I'm like, who are these people? I'm like a medium in US shirt, and I'm a triple XL by English standards.
Yeah.
What's a normal human being? This
exactly.
is crazy.
And I think it was one of those like confluences too. I think I just read a book, one of the Malcolm Gladwell books that talked about markets. And it was like in every market, there's Coke, Pepsi, and RC Cola. Coke is going to be 40 or 50%, then Pepsi is going to be 30, RC is going to be 10, and then all the rest.
Okay.
But in every market, like McDonald's, Burger King, Arby's, whatever, it's like a rule.
Interesting.
And so at the time, now anyone that's into cycling, there's 50 of them. But at the time, there was like Rafa, ASOS, which are two really high-end companies, and then like you go to REI. Like there was nothing else.
Because almost in some ways it's the microbrew thing that exploded in Minnesota, right? There's all these, now it's like everyone's starting a little micro jersey, clothing wear, or whatever.
So it's
you're ahead of your
example.
time.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, there's Rafa, there's REI, there's RC, there's no Pepsi. We should be Pepsi. And so then Michael, a guy I worked with who's been with me forever, his niece, I think, was just graduating from fashion school. She could help you. And so we used to meet at Spy House in Uptown and be like, she'd be measuring me, crouching over in the coffee shop, and we made patterns, and we tried to make them all here in the United States, custom patterns, high panels, super cool. Like it was a really fun process.
Where'd all the fabric come from?
We would buy it from like Italy. And long story short, this 8 months ago, we just donated like $40,000 of Italian fabric that we had in the warehouse.
That you just couldn't use, or what?
Because the quick version of this is we tried for 3 or 4 years to make everything in the United States. And the cost was so high that we were going to go out of business if we kept doing it. So we only make a couple products here now. And then the other ones are either in Hungary, we make some, China, Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And so our initial mission was trying to do it all here. We just couldn't.
Cost killed you. What's interesting, a quick side note, I've gotten into cycling the last couple of years. Turns out when all your neighbors are ultra athletes, you start getting into it too. But I fell pretty bad about 2 months ago on my bike, and I was wearing your kit and the Donkey Label stuff, and I dislocated my shoulders or separated it, bruised up my hip. And I was telling you this the other day, rode home another 15 miles, whatever, I'm bleeding everywhere and in a lot of pain. I looked down, there's not even a scratch mark, a tear. Yeah. There was nothing wrong with my jersey. I'm like, what is this stuff made out of? It's like Kevlar.
And that's what we found is our initial thought was like, let's keep it here because it's going to be better quality. It's going to be better products. And what we found out was like, we can actually get better quality and better products from people that are making this like
on a regular basis.
Yeah. So we do, when we can, we make our mountain bike shorts here in town locally. Mm-hmm. And we do as much as we can where it makes sense. But
so you've had the company for 20 years?
DL has been around 12
years. Wow. Yeah. And we're not going to talk. I mean, it's funny because I was laughing, like you do a lot of business development with architects and because of the solar panel stuff. And you often bring some Donkey Label socks or whatever, you give it to them. And then you end up spending the whole interview talking about Donkey Label. So that's why I called it, like, I guess it is a good analogy, the sexy sister. You're like, oh, Paul, you're cool, but your sister's really cool. Let's talk about your sister. Let's talk about Donkey Label.
And I actually think it all, one of our Spy models a while back was like, it all matters. Like we're designers at heart, whether it's solar or cycling or AV. And so architects who are basically the people guiding the client are that as well. And so they appreciate us because we speak the same language. So on the Spy side, we understand, hey, the speaker should technically go there, but we get that's not going to work with the room. So we'll adjust it and move it. Same thing with solar. It's like your roof is your house and you don't want it to look.
Well, and I think that's where, going back to the solar conversation, the Tesla shingle, for those that haven't seen it, it's worth checking out on your website and just seeing it in general. It is interesting because I still think and we'll talk maybe a little bit about the differences in terms of operation. So you've got your normal solar panels, which most people know what those look like. The Tesla Solar Shake essentially fits in, and obviously it's going to reflect differently than a different shingle, but it's much more elegant and lays into the fabric of the house. I think the big question is how are people, I have found, this is only for myself, because now, having since met you, I basically have you run a solar analysis on every home that I design, and will moving forward. I suspect that the clientele that is below 40, it's only a matter of time before they adopt it, because we've been talking about solar and energy, all that stuff for so long. It's only a matter of time, but it's ingrained in people. I found that my older clientele aren't willing to pay for it.
Right.
And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your point of view. This is just mine as a custom home builder. And part of it is on us to push the narrative a little bit. And I know for sure, when I've done studies with you on your traditional solar, it pays for itself in about 7 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty good payback, actually. It's better than geothermal's 10 or 12 with tax credits, it seems like, depending on the size of the field. Tesla, obviously, it's much more expensive. So it depends a little bit on how big the array can be, I assume. Right. Talk us a little bit about what are people saying, and who are your clients, and who's saying yes to this, and how are they? You have the greenback greenie that's doing it because it makes financial sense. And then you have the other person that's doing it because they feel like it's the right thing to do. And maybe there's another one I'm not aware of, but talk us a little bit about the sales approach of the client.
Yeah. Well, solar in general, those are the two kind of fields that you just mentioned, but we're seeing more now. I don't want the government, the energy company, anyone in my business.
So not independents.
Yeah. Independents that are like, I want to own all my stuff. I don't want to depend on anyone for anything. So we've seen that. When it comes to Tesla, it's basically super tech forward. Like, I love tech. I love all the new stuff. I want to be an early adopter. I want people to see that I have the latest tech in my house because I have the car. People that are doing it for the right reasons, saying, hey, I want to do what I can for the environment. And then the financial return. And then I guess the third one is the aesthetics. I do not want panels on my house. I don't care how good it is for the environment. I care too much about what it looks like. So then that gives them an option of something that doesn't look like solar, that is solar.
This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 20 years, I've been using Pella windows, and I couldn't be happier to call them as a business partner, a trade partner, and someone that really supports us in our quality builds. We use wood windows and doors on every single one of our homes, and 98% of every home that I've ever built has been a Pella window. I've gotten to know their team here locally as well as nationally, and the way that they support us as a craftsman, as well as they support our homeowners with their lifelong guarantee, has actually been a game changer for me. So when people ask me who I use, I recommend Pella. If you want to hear more about Pella's story, you can listen to episode 1, where I interview Peter and Ed from Pella Northland about their journey into the Pella ownership. This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. For over 2 years now, I've been using Adaptive. It's an incredible game changer. It's AI technology based. It helps you with bill pay. And as a builder, there's very few things that anger our subs more than not being paid on time. Well, those days are gone. Not only do you know exactly where you are, but you can pay people through your ACH channels, making draws extremely quick. With one click of a button, which used to take hours, my office staff is now able to generate a draw to the bank or to the client in literally seconds. The thing that I appreciate the most about Adaptive is their ability to keep changing. We've given them 3 or 4 feedbacks on the things that we need as builders, and within just a few months, they're rolling those things out. This is saving us hours per week and days per month in terms of our efficiency. If you're looking to upgrade your business, I'd highly recommend Adaptive. You can reach out to them at adaptive.com or listen to the Curious Builder podcast, episode 15 or episode 80, where we dive into their origin story.
The financial piece, if it's new construction, it isn't that much. It almost could have an infinite ROI in terms of like how profitable it is, because it's based on, when you do a regular solar project, the cost of the solar is the cost of the solar. You divide it by when it pays itself back, there's your return. Tesla roof, yes, there's solar, but it's also a roof. So you were going to put a cedar shake or a clay tile or
I hadn't actually even considered
Yeah.
that side of
so
it.
you have to subtract that from the ROI calculation. So if you're going to put the cheapest asphalt shingle alive on, your ROI is not going to be great. It might be 30 years.
But if you did like a cedar shake, which is about 3 to 4 times the cost of asphalt, or a metal roof,
Right.
which is 4 times the cost,
Yeah.
now you're starting to get not that far off of whatever solar is, plus the fact that it'll pay for itself.
Right.
A metal roof is not paying for
Well,
itself.
and then the other piece that people don't realize is, if I put a cedar shake roof on and then solar, let's say my cedar shake roof's 100 grand and the solar's 50 grand. I get a 30% tax credit off my 50, right? So that's 15 grand tax credit, but I'm in for 135 total. If I do Tesla, let's say it's 200 grand total, so it's a little more, but you get 30% off the 200 grand.
It's actually a net less.
So it's 140 versus 135, whatever.
Right,
so
it's really darn close.
It's the same. Now, we just did a project that was a standing seam metal roof. They had a quote, I think, for 70 grand for the roof. We were going to do, it was like $50,000 solar system if they just did solar on the standing seam roof. So that puts it at 120. You get the deduction of the 15, you're at 105. The Tesla roof for the same roof was 120. So you get 30% off that. So it's 36 grand off that, goes to 84. So they saved whatever that is.
15 grand.
15 grand
yeah.
and got solar and producing power. So that stuff like that is the math that people aren't doing.
For the builders out there, whether you're in Minnesota or not and using Greenway Solar, or whether you're listening and you're abroad, I know obviously we have a lot of listeners that are in California and in Arizona. Obviously, I would assume they're further along their path in solar just because it's much more part of their mandates and culture, for lack of a better description. But I think in Minnesota, I think you'd be remiss of not having this priced out on every single project. That's what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Why not? And then it's just a conversation with the client. And typically, there's the performance of your home. There's also the aesthetics of your home. And I'm talking about cabinetry and interior design and all those things. But I think a lot of this, at least in Minnesota, comes from the builder, because I was just talking recently to some architects that we had on the podcast that Minnesota has the oldest parade of homes in the country. I think we're 75 years in, which is pretty robust. And so we have a strong culture of people, home ownership, touring homes. And that's so the reason I bring it up is a lot of builders start the dialogue of who the team is. So a lot of times people come to us, and then we, based on their needs, their budget, their interests, what they like, we'll bring in 1 or 2 architects they might interview with, 1 or 2 designers. But then it's up to the builder to often push some of the narrative. And I do think that solar is one of them. Energy performance is one of them. I think over the last couple of years, the advancements in external insulation to the outside envelope of your house is huge. And if you have, anyway, I just think all of these things we as builders need to educate ourselves on so that we can properly educate our client. And it will set you apart from your competition as well. Yeah. It's a huge differentiator in terms of if you're going to choose A or B builder, to say, hey, this is my expertise. And I think, again, Minnesota, compared to, at least in the custom realm, in terms of net zero, doesn't seem like we have that many net zeros here. But I do know that Minnesota builds at scale more efficient homes than anywhere else in the country, because we're in climate zone 6 and 7.
Yeah.
Or whatever, 5 and 6, 6 and 7, whichever one it is. But so we had someone on that was talking about the T delta on temperature. So like in Arizona, like I hate the heat, but it gets to 120 degrees and they might cool their house to 70. That's only a 50-degree delta. Where in Minnesota, let's say you heat your house to 70, but it's 0, which gets way close. That's 70. That's 20 more. It goes to negative 20. Holy smokes. It's a huge delta. So anyway, that's why I think Minnesota and the northern climate states, the homes have to be more efficient. Yeah.
And we did a lot of work with Tesla too, because when we first started with them 4 years ago, their installation instructions weren't even considering that water might go uphill.
You mean like capillary where it's pulling it up?
Like in the winter here, right? Like you can get water going backwards under shingles. And so that's why we have some different rules on how to actually even put the roof on. And they were used to Texas and Arizona. And so our first couple of roofs, we were fighting with them on the rules that we were supposed to install by and saying, hey, we need to help you change this because there's some different things in Minnesota that, to your point about -10 and water and wind.
How does it handle getting to the nitty gritty here? So obviously it snows in our climate, and let's talk a little bit about just the efficiency in a northern climate like Minnesota. How efficient are solar panels in terms of, obviously it's darker now here than it is in the summer solstice time. Angle of sun, I know probably is really important. And then coverage. Obviously you've got whether clouds or snow. I think I don't know these answers, and I'm sure a lot of people don't.
Yeah, Minnesota is actually a pretty sunny state. You wouldn't, if you look at them all, like it's actually, we get a ton of sun. Yes, we get wind, we get snow. So clouds everyone gets, so that's not really a thing. But all the models, when we even produce that ROI, that's not an assumption of like 12 years of sun. It's at every location down to the foot is done. And this is the weather predictions of that site, the angles of the roof, the efficiencies of the cells. That's all figured in. And so those ROIs are based on sun and snow patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So the cool thing about the Tesla roof is it sheds the snow immediately. That's the good and the bad. So the good is your roof's going to make power all year long because it's
And
not.
why is that? Is it the viscosity or not viscosity?
It's just that it's smooth enough and it's black and it produces power, so it does get a little warm. Whereas normal solar panels have a ledge. So you have your roof that's going to have potentially asphalt shingle, so that's going to hold snow. And then your panels are sitting up over it. And so when it snows, that just sits there. And so you might get coverage on a residential regular roof for January and February.
Interesting.
But Tesla, like the minute the snow's done, it's going to shed.
Interesting.
So the good and the bad of that is, the good is you get solar and you have a clean roof all winter. The bad is it sheds. And so we've had some existing homes that weren't thinking about that have avalanches right over their front door, their back patio. So we put up snow guards in those situations. But probably half our clients say, no snow guards, I want it to shed, I don't care. And some say, hey, let's put snow guards up here.
To be clear, that happens with metal roofs all the time, right? The snow fence or whatever you decide to add on.
Yeah.
It's just a climate thing.
But in just like the sun, obviously, like you said, is lower angle. It's not out as much in the winter. So our theory on kind of solar production in Minnesota is make hay in the summer, like dial everything in for summer production. And then January, February are always going to be a crapshoot. So don't try to like optimize for a month or two that might be insane.
Yep.
But the models all kind of figure that out. And most of the predictions over a 5-year period are like right on, if not conservative.
How long is the solar panels good for?
Warranty for most panels, and Tesla included, is 25 years. So Tesla's a 25-year warranty on production and on the roof. The estimated life is a 70-year roof. So they're thinking,
whoa,
it's like anything like TVs, monitors, they say, hey, here's the life. It's not like it turns off when that life is over. It's just, that's what it's rated for. And then it like diminishes over time. So solar will operate 40, 50 years.
If you think of just put in perspective for, let's say, homeowners listening to this, like an asphalt roof is likely going to make it 20 years. They say 30 years, but realistically, you're in the plus minus 20 years. Cedar shingle, oddly enough, is especially if you maintain it, is pretty similar. Metal obviously can last way longer. Yeah. So it's more. So does the solar shingle loses efficiency in terms of what it gains?
Yep. So all solar loses about 0.5% a year just from the second it sees the sun the first time.
Okay.
And so
it's breaking down, it's degrading, or
it just doesn't like if one comes in, one goes out before it's ever seeing the sun, and then one comes in and 99.5 comes out. It's just
okay.
It's just like the systems and the silica just degrade over time.
Yeah.
So that just keeps happening, but it doesn't ever just break. And the cool thing about solar is there's no moving parts. So it's not like there's gears or something that could break down. It kind of works.
Can you replace individual?
Yes.
Okay.
So on regular solar, of course, and then on the Tesla shingle, you can pop out a shingle and replace it.
And what about like hail? Like how does it handle?
So Tesla's got the highest hail rating, the highest wind rating, the highest fire rating of any product on the market.
Really? More than metal?
Yep.
No way.
Or equal to. It's the highest, got the highest rating of all of them.
Interesting.
And so it's bomb proof. It's pretty slick.
What has been your experience when you talk about it? Makes me want to put solar on every single thing I've ever had, and going forward, which we are planning to do a lot more of. What are the biggest barriers? Is it mainly education?
Part of it's education. Part of it is, it's not a luxury in terms of what we think of a luxury, but it's a luxury purchase in terms of like your power company will sell you power next week. So you should do solar, but you could do it next week, next year, 2 years from now. There's really no like urgency. If your car is breaking down and it's starting to cost you more, then you just get a new one. There's some urgency there, but with solar, if you have your house, you don't need to do it. So it's nice to do. It's cool to do. You should do it, but you could wait a month because
I can relate very much to the urgency factor. I feel like right now, the last 6 months building, I feel like it's been really difficult to get people to design new homes. I feel like the urgency is, unless there's I always like young families because I have a young family, so I can relate to them. But on the business side, there's usually something happening. They're having more children. They're having less children. There's a reason. There's an urgency to do something. It's really hard to manufacture urgency when it doesn't exist.
Right.
Because people do buy based on emotion.
Right.
And if there's not some emotional hook, it's pretty hard sometimes to get somebody to do something. And right now in building, I think between the By the time this airs, the election will be over, thank goodness. And you also have, we're looking at some rate drops from what they're saying. So obviously from that standpoint, we're seeing a lot of people, again, there's no urgency because if I wait, it's likely to be better than it is today.
Yeah.
And so I can totally
our
empathize.
sales funnel, I would say, is bigger than it's ever been, but that doesn't mean much because everyone's waiting.
Yeah.
And whether it's the election or for interest rates, it's because it's a huge purchase, whether there's an ROI or not, it's still a lot of money.
And what percentage of your, let's call it just solar business in general, is residential to commercial?
It's probably 50-50 in terms of revenue, but probably 80-20 in terms of number of, jobs, because commercial jobs are large.
Yeah.
Tesla, we've done almost by the end of this year, we'll maybe do 50 installations, which doesn't seem like a lot, but for Tesla, that's a lot. Anywhere ranging from $600,000 for a roof to $60,000.
Wow, some big roofs. Yeah. Talk a little bit about the Tesla power walls and the batteries. And a lot of the homes that we build in the western side of Minneapolis, we're doing backup generators. And a lot of our clients, let's say, have pools. And so our outdoor hot tub, I put in probably 3 or 4 generators. And you can either have a whole house generator that will make the house just run indefinitely however you want it. One will be just like your refrigerator and like maybe your outside water line, so that in the wintertime you wouldn't freeze your pool lines or something like that. So bare essentials, waiting for the power to come back on. I framed it that way just to talk a little bit about these Tesla power walls. Yeah, I just know enough to be dangerous, but tell us a little bit about, for those that are not educated about EV cars in general, and also how these Tesla power walls, essentially they're on-demand batteries that live in your garage that can replace a generator and are being powered by the sun. Am I close to?
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, get us a little close.
So Tesla is a brand that makes a battery, and there's other brands that are equally as good, but essentially a battery backup is the alternative to a generator. For new construction, because I assume if we're talking about a lot of builders, there's another product called Span, which is essentially a smart breaker panel.
That thing looks really cool.
Yeah,
too.
So every new house should have one of those, like that's not even an option. And then battery backup right now is like in Minnesota is a luxury. In other states, it's an ROI that could be almost a year payback. And the reason for that is other states do time of use billing for electricity, which means that they don't charge the same amount for different times of the day. So it might be 3 cents at midnight, and at 8 in the morning when everyone gets up and turns on their toasters, it's 30 cents. And so then you can use a battery to arbitrage that and say, okay, I'm going to charge my battery when it's 3 cents. And then instead of using the grid when it's 30, I'm going to use my battery. And so then those things pay for themselves like instantly.
You mean the battery?
The battery.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, the ones that we end up selling are the people that want protection from a power outage. They're not worried about the ROI. They're just like, hey, if I lose power, I want to make sure we're good. And then we would do the calculation of how much of your house do you want to operate for how long. That would tell you if you need 1 battery or 3 batteries or 10 batteries.
Right.
But it's coming down the pike. I think Excel said in January of 2025, they're going to change to time of use billing. And so then you may see like batteries outpace solar in terms of any house can do it. If you have tree coverage, you have a bad roof for solar, you live in a condo.
So let me get this straight. So because we actually looked at doing solar at my own personal house. I live in Southwest Minneapolis, and we have heavy tree cover. Solar just doesn't really make a lot of sense because it never shines on the roof. Should probably cut down some trees. Anyway, so you're saying I could get a Powerwall battery.
Yes.
And I'm charging it with Excel's energy.
Yep. So like when this happens, I'll make sure I'm calling you number 2. That's when I'm going to put mine in. I don't have one at my house because we don't lose power that often. And when
we don't lose power hardly ever.
Excel gets it back on in 2 to 3 hours.
Agreed.
If we lived in California where you get brownouts and you got 2 days of P&G not giving you electricity, that's different. But once Excel changes the way they're going to do their billing, I'll have one the next day.
And walk us more granularly why that is. So I'm using the power on the grid to charge my battery.
Yep.
And then when the usage rate goes really high, I'm using the energy I already paid for Excel.
But you paid 2 cents.
Yeah.
And now they're charging you 30. So you're gaining 28 cents a kilowatt hour during that period where anyone else that doesn't have a battery doesn't have a choice but to buy.
So if you know that's coming, why don't you buy the battery now?
Just because I think there's going to be some incentives and things that are going to tie into that. Because the other piece is what the big utilities are doing now is some of them are saying, okay, if we can get 1 million batteries out there, we can set up a program where we'll say, hey, Mark, will you sell us some energy if we need it? And we'll pay you like $2 a kilowatt hour. And I'm just making this number up. And then if you say yes, and they get 1 million people to say yes, when there's a huge need for power, instead of them having to go to Nebraska or South Dakota and say, hey, we need to buy power from you, they can just turn on 1 million batteries that have stored power and take it back to the grid. So that's the benefit the utility gets, is that they can now have instantaneous power, because it takes time to turn on a plant, it takes time to get power from Nebraska. And so they can arbitrage their need for power
You
through
could see
us.
how obviously we just had massive power outages through the hurricanes down in the Southeast. I
Yeah.
could see how this generators, power batteries, all this stuff is going to be with more and more extreme weather, regardless of where you live.
Yeah, we were helping a guy in Tennessee or somewhere down there, and he was looking at a Tesla roof. And because in the winter, we're trying to look sometimes to go south and do installs because we can't do them up here. And he asked for 12 power walls. And we're like, why do you need 12 power walls? Your house needs 2. And he said, no, these are Airbnbs. He's like, during a hurricane, I can rent it out for $100,000 a week, because the rich people from Florida or wherever, they want power. They want it. They want to live, and they'll just come and stay here.
Oh, they'll stay at his B&B. I thought
because it has power,
right.
not because of any other reason other than it has full power, beautiful house.
I thought you were saying he'd have 12 of these jacked up and charged, and that they would be portable, and you'd be able to take a power wall to somebody's house and plug it in.
That would be another idea. I trademark that.
Why don't you start your 4th company?
Yeah,
that was actually my final question. Is what's the next company? But I'll save that one.
We actually, my boys have a golf ball business where they go to Theodore Worth, find golf balls, clean them up, and sell them. So that's the 4th one.
All right, that's pretty funny. How that pretty kills it on the solar. It's really interesting from an operation standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about teams here for the last half hour. Tell us about. Everyone loves some good fail stories, and I suspect you've got quite a few. Yeah, tell us a little bit about. I think one of the things that we were talking about at lunch before we came on here was you'd always been told that you don't use debt to do payroll. And of course, that's what you did.
Right.
Just stuff like that. Let's chat a little bit about stuff that you've learned. You've owned a business now for 25 years or several of them. What are some things that you've learned not to do? And what are some things you went headfirst into a wall and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that again. But because a lot of owning a business is just perseverance and will.
Yeah.
And like I heard somewhere recently, I'd be curious to see if you agree with this, that it's okay to fail, but fail fast. Yeah. And the concept, of course, is like the faster you fail, the quicker you can get up. If you have a long fail, it's going to bleed you dry of all your cash.
Yeah. I heard something the other day too. It was like, make a quick decision is better than the right one taking too long.
Yep.
Because if you make it and it's wrong, you can at least see it's wrong and move on. We don't have time for all the fail stories. One of the early Tesla ones was, and I knew this, but the first job we did, I think we sold for $100,000 and it cost us 160. And the guy, it was interesting. He was an accountant by trade. And he came out one day and he's like, hey, Paul, I've been doing the math on how many people you have working here and how long you've been here. He's like, I got to believe you're spending like 150 grand doing this. I'm like, yeah. He's like, ooh. I'm like, so you want to chip in? He's like, no, we signed a contract. But I also knew like we had to be first through the door. It's any new technology. We did our best on the first quote. Convincing the first person to say yes is also tough.
Yep.
Because once you get that first yes, then you have one to show the next person.
And that was a little bit sales, right? You can be like, and now you can say, hey, we just did this. You could say, I just did this for a decade.
And stuff like that. I think what we talked about at lunch was you're building a business, you take out a loan, you think it's about growing your team, and then all of a sudden 2007, 8 hits and it goes to 0. You have a team, what are you going to do? And a lot of these people, when you were trying to start this thing, came on for less money they could have got somewhere else, or came on as a favor, worked longer, didn't ask for benefits. And now it's a time where you can't afford to keep them. And the MBA book says, never pay them, just cut them. But it's a human. And so we
get emotionally attached.
Yeah, we didn't, in part because that these people dug in deep for you when you need it. Now this is where you got to dig in for them. But the MBA is not wrong. Like I've been digging out of that debt from 2007 still, because it's not like you never get it back. So there's stuff like that. And I think one of the things for me is I had to find, and I talked about this, I was in the CEO roundtable for a long time, and we always talked about, a couple of the companies ran traction, so we started doing that, which is an EOS. Everyone should read it, that's doing a small business. But we implemented that, and I'm obviously a visionary and maybe an extreme case. So me finding that integrator, that person that's going to be like the steady hand and get the trains on time, has been key. And we've been through a couple of them, but we've got a guy now is great. And I don't have to stress if I'm like, I'm going to this podcast, I'm gone for the day. That's what I should be doing. And he's making sure things happen. And so structure, which is not my skill set at all, is what a business needs to scale. And so for 25 years, we've been bumping up against these ceilings of what a dysfunctional family that still gets to the reunion on time does, but maybe doesn't have the ability to say, okay, let's take that and replicate it 2 more times or 3 more times.
I feel like, at least earlier on in my career, I'd never thought about scale. You're reacting.
Yeah.
You're not proactive at all. At least I wasn't. And I had recently mentioned this, that I don't think age of service or time of service has anything to do with the scale of your business. I know
Right.
builders that have been building for 10, 11 years, and they're like 100, 150 million in revenue, and they're 35 employees and just absolutely killing it. And you're like, that's amazing. I'm like, I'm
Right.
super excited about that. And you're like, hey, here I am with 4 employees,
Right.
way less than that. And it's not a comparison. It's more of just like an evaluation of, wow, they got things a lot different. And the person I'm thinking of was, they came from a corporate background. They saw scale at a different. So I think we're so informed by our, not only our upbringing, obviously as kids, but also like our path to
Right.
entrepreneurship. I sometimes think there's a huge advantage to maybe even buying a business.
Yeah.
I think right now, I think I heard somewhere that there's 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. Think of how many businesses are owned by baby boom. And so it'd be a great opportunity. You don't need cash to buy in. Obviously, you could come to somebody, and I think HVAC, plumbing, there's so many great trade organizations, especially within the construction world,
Yeah.
where if you're going to own a business, I'd find it hard pressed to find a career you could own a business faster, somehow associated around construction.
Yeah, I think the future AI is never going to take any of the construction jobs. So there's a huge opportunity there. But I also think, you said earlier about an entrepreneur, like someone told me once, and it made sense, which is true. Like the difference between someone that starts their own business and runs one and like someone that works for a company is who can sleep with the debt, who can go to bed at night with that hanging over your head every night and not freak out. I think that's the actual, that's the only skill that separates someone like me from someone else. And maybe it's stupidity or ignorance or
Honestly,
optimism.
A lot of it is temperament.
Yeah.
Some people are bothered by certain things.
Yeah.
And I think availability of risk, I'm totally off. I know you're just out in Zion National Park, and so we were chatting about that. But like Alex Honnold, famous rock climber, he has a great quote. He was being interviewed recently, and he said that as a culture, we don't do things that cause us real fear enough. And his concept was, if we don't really know fear, then you can't really know its opposite, let's say joy or peace and things like that, because we've lost touch with some of those things. I think that's probably what draws us both to, whether it's athletics or competition. Or I asked someone the other day when we were biking, Tony, actually, I asked him, I said, why do you think humans are obsessed with speed? And he's the philosopher. I just asked the questions. And he said, I think it's that because we're close to the veil of death. A really cool, I was like, ooh, that's a good one. And his comment was like, when you're going really fast, there's a part of you that realizes like your own mortality. Like I could get hurt, maybe not dying, but obviously if a bus hits you, which almost happened with Charlie the other day. That guy, never let him go first across an intersection. He does not know what a car means. Being outside nature, I get so much inspiration personally, professionally. It energizes me to do what we do by going. And I'm speaking really, why am I talking about this? It's about temperament. It's like what informs a lot of, I know so many entrepreneurs, it's like you do this, you're excited about, but you have to get your energy or you have to be empowered by something else. Your job can empower you too. It's not that you're not, but I just feel like so many entrepreneurs that I talk to, that there's also another thing or part of their makeup that makes their temperament different. And then as you start interviewing other entrepreneurs, in this case it's builders or whatever you do, it's like you find these little commonalities, like, oh, I can identify with that. Oh, I see that in myself too.
Yeah, I think it also helps. The reason probably we do that, and I look at myself like, the risk is okay for me or something I need. It's also probably why I do sports. And some people run or bike, but they don't enter races. And I think racing to me, for some reason, is as close as you get. Like I always think about this at the beginning of a race because I'm nervous. I'm like, why am I nervous? I've done this. But I think it's, we don't have any situations in life anymore. Picture back in the Vikings, we're going to war tomorrow. Get your sword. That morning, how you joke that the porta potties are always full at a race. Imagine what it's like when you're like, oh, I might not just lose or not get my time, but I might get stabbed in the gut. And so I feel like that's as close as we get to those parts that humans need to like establish what they are. And so to me, that's why I still race, not because I think I'm going to win or whatever, but it's because like you pin that number on, you're putting yourself out there to win, lose, to be ranked against your peers. And I think that's probably my downside on business is I do it because I think it is a competition, because there is winners and losers. And if you can't look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm the greatest, when the stats say you're the 7th, whatever. Getting back to temperament, I think that's, you never know if it's you're an entrepreneur because of that, or because of that, you're an entrepreneur.
That's a good, I think it's, I would say the latter. I think it's because of that, you're an entrepreneur.
Right.
Not always.
But look at running. Like, how many of your ultra running buddies are not type A? Most of them. Like, to me,
are not type A?
Are type A.
No, they're all type A. I was like, wait a minute, they're all type A.
But that's my point. Are they type A because they're runners, or are they runners because they're type? Do lawyers and doctors and whoever go into running because it's this? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
The other thing that you have to be concerned about, other than all the other things, our friends, is that when you surround yourself with a bunch of people that are similar, you end up, it's hard.
Right.
Sometimes you don't get a lot of perspective.
Right.
Because someone sent me out a quote the other day that in a decade, being fit will be far more rare than being a millionaire.
Oh, yeah.
And the comment that was in the quote was that it takes time, dedication, and in a society we continue to get more and more obese as a culture.
Right.
But obviously, if we were to look at the groups of people we hang out with, that's not normal. I realize that.
Right.
I'm not that far gone that I don't realize that. Not everyone wants to do that, but it
keeps you, like, it keeps you honest. I think athletics keep you honest because it's, to your point, the one thing you can't buy. So you can be super well off, super loaded, and drive down the road and think, oh, I'm doing well because I have this Porsche, I have this whatever. But it's the one thing that, like, money can't buy, which is like dedication, blue collar work, getting out there. Mm-hmm. And so I always keep athletics as like that barometer of, if I ever get too high on myself, I got 10 buddies that'll kick my butt. And so, yeah, I have some friends that think I'm crazy. Oh my God, I can't believe you ride your bike that much. And then I'm like, with these other people, I'm not even on the radar of how good they are. And so keeping that perspective, and I think with business too, it's, you can't get too full of yourself or successes. When I think my family and people that are around me, like, they feel like sometimes I don't get excited enough about the wins. But I tell them, like, in business, like, literally within 5 minutes of a win, you're going to get a loss. And so if you get too excited about the win, the losses will crush you. So you just have to, like, keep it steady.
My dad used to always say, steady at the helm.
Yeah.
I think of someone just being buffeted by wind and waves. Yeah. And that captain is just like steady. I'm a very emotional, positive person. And so I usually don't get super low, but I get these very high highs. And of course, I can't help myself. You get a win.
Right.
You get a new contract. You get pretty excited. We used to have this thing in the office. We haven't done it now in a while. And it was Black Sabbath Iron Man. Whenever we signed a contract, I would turn on all the speakers in the office and it would just be like, dun, dun, dun. And everyone in the office was like, oh no. And then I would walk downstairs. Iron Man.
Well, I feel like sometimes I got to remember that, because even though I'm the one stressed out with what's coming next, like, the team needs the win because they work their butt off to get it. And so I got to make sure I'm trying to, like, not be always like, yeah, that's great, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
I think having people in your life, it could be your spouse, it could be people on your team that help you. I would not say I'm a super self-aware person on certain things, that we all have our blind spots, of course, but I think it's taken me a long time to realize that the thing I need, and everyone needs an integrator. I feel like everyone I talk to, basically, because I always talk to business owners, we all need integrators. Yes. But, like, because I'm all yellow and red disc assessment, which is driver, visionary, and but I've looked at people the wrong way for a long time. I used to think that more people, more problems.
Right.
And there is an element to, obviously, and we're conscientious. We care about people. So to your earlier comment, it's not, actually, last year was the first time in my career I've ever had to fire somebody.
Right.
Before they left because they wanted to go somewhere else, which is fine. A wimpy way to fire someone.
I'm the worst at that.
Yeah. And so, but in some ways I learned a lot through that experience. And one of them is that when you have people that are really great, your life becomes easier. And every time I've hired someone that was the right fit, that is extremely competent, they do the job better than I can anyway. Yeah. So why didn't I do that earlier? Yeah. And so now I'm actually really excited. I don't want to go super crazy with scale, but I definitely want to scale bigger than I am. Yeah. More to buy back freedom and time. And I think people can equate to, and I like the team camaraderie. I think the one thing that even having the podcast has taught me as I interview with other builders is I just really love people. Yeah. And I really like being around people. So I want to, having the interview makes me feel like I'm on everybody's team. Yeah. It feels I'm part of Greenway Solar at Donkey.
Well, you kind of are.
I am. Yeah. I know. I wear your stuff all the time. Plus now we've got you at Sonic Camp and Boot Camp.
That's
so
right.
Donkey Label's coming in hot. When you look around, what are some, I haven't asked this question before, but I'm just feeling it now. Like, what companies inspire you? Like, where do you get your inspiration from a business standpoint?
So speaking of podcasts, there's a couple I listen to, Pivot and the All In, which they're interesting. One's more tech and business, and one's more just these VC bros that talk about all the insights of these bigger companies, but just how they view trends and how they try to position their companies. I think my next piece is You mentioned it, but we started looking at our employees in terms of, do they make our lives easier or harder? And just that simple. Instead of all these rubrics and metrics, like there's certain people, and you've had them, like they just solve things before it's a problem. And they're like, hey, this happened, I fixed it. Like, thank you. Then you have others that are like, hey, here's a problem, and like dump it in your lap. And this lady I used to be in the CEO roundtable with, she said having kids was one of the best things that happened to her as a manager, because her time got so short that she couldn't put up with all the BS she was putting up with before. And so she used to say to people, like they'd come into her office and she'd be like, take that monkey, keep it on your back, and get out of here. Because she'd be like, they're going to try and dump it in my office, their problem in my office.
Well, good for her to recognize that, because you don't always recognize that.
And with scale, that's the one thing I've noticed is when you have 2 people, you can deal with it. We're at like 25 now.
That's a big operation.
Yeah. And so it's just a lot. And so it's a lot of personalities. It's just a lot. And so trying to get those people in leadership positions is really what my next piece is, because everyone's going to make mistakes, and those mistakes cost us money, or the business. What I'm trying to get better at is that mistake is me investing in your learning. So instead of yelling at you for it, make sure you learn from it and make sure we never do it again, and let's go, and not get out of here, but stay, because I just invested that in you. And then just finding people that are really good culture fits, that technical ability or not, are they going to make others around them better? Because that's what you need. Else more people means more problems.
Yeah, that's true. I listened to a podcast a lot called Founders. And anyway, they were talking about, or he was talking about Rockefeller. And he talked a little bit about your employees when they fail, or the continuity, or maybe this was Charlie Munger, actually, now that I think about it, he references him a lot, and Warren Buffett. But the concept is, once you've invested in somebody, it's like compounded. Like when you take a stock position and it's giving you a return, don't pull that stock out.
Right.
Like let it keep compounding, like a Roth IRA, let it go. And your employees, treat them good, make them happy. It's not just a one-way street. Like we care about our people too. And as they grow, they take your company, they level up your company as well. What's interesting about, or what I would say is about, we just went through a rebranding process a couple of years ago, and it'd been about 10 years prior to that we'd done the previous rebrand. And my wife had said, your clients have lifted you to a level that your brand no longer represents. It's time for a brand refresh. It's a little bit like a shirt.
Yeah.
I do like nice clothes, so I guess it's not the best for me. But sometimes you look back and you're like, wow, I've had that shirt for 10 years. And your wife, that shirt's a little tired.
Yeah.
You need a new shirt. And I that was the company. That was my brand. Like my brand no longer fit the homes we were producing anymore. Yeah. And it's interesting, when we went through that brand exercise and that brand refresh, everyone was, whoa, love the brand. That's cool. But it's funny. The brand just represents what you've already become. Right. It's like you were the larva, and now you're a butterfly, and now it needs to represent that. And I think your company evolves, and sometimes people can evolve with you.
Right.
Recently, we had somebody, different backstory, I won't obviously go into it or share names, but it was basically, they said, we feel like your company is going in a different direction than we want to go with. Right. And I said, great. And thank you for the time together. We've done great work together. The door's always open, but I don't know what that person meant. I think they had some negative baggage there, but I can leave that at the door. Yeah. We had 12 years together, so that's fine. But my point is, some people grow with you and some don't. And I think because this business and businesses in general, we're really emotionally attached to people. It's sometimes hard for us when people don't want to grow when we're growing.
Right.
I find as a business owner, because I'm a voracious reader and podcasts and audiobooks, I have a hard time when people on my team, I don't see self-improvement.
Right.
And because I'm just manically obsessed with it. But I realize it's a very common entrepreneurship issue.
Yeah.
And not everyone has that drive or that type A or whatever you want to call it. Do you sometimes have a hard time with that when your mind is working? Or are you able to say, hey, and I'm not even saying it's better, because I see people that are maybe more at peace or more, I'm not saying it's always healthy, by the way. I look at sometimes people and they seem very happy. That's not that I'm not happy. It's just that you understand the question. Like your minds you're constantly thinking about new things. That's the visionary, not curse, but that's the downside of always coming up with new ideas.
Yeah, I think that being an entrepreneur or running a business, I guess you don't even have to be an entrepreneur. Like you're trying to block and tackle 17 things at once, and you're always worried about something. So an employee is looking at their box and so, oh yeah, we didn't close a job this week, but we'll probably get it next week. And to you, you're hearing payroll. Right. And so your urgency is so different than theirs, but it's taken a while. But I finally learned I can't expect, you get so frustrated. Like, why aren't they thinking like about the money and about, it's your business, it's not theirs. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to understand perspectives, which is hard because it's easy to get not resentful, but maybe that is the right word. Because there's been times where I put people's payroll on my credit card and then they'll come and say, hey, I really think that just something where you're like, you don't even understand,
What I did
what
to
I'm
keep-
doing right now. And you're complaining about X, right? Holy cow. But you can't really put that on them. Hey, I'm putting your payroll and credit card because we don't have any sales and we're probably on the verge of going out of business.
Yep. You don't know what you don't know.
And to your point about mistakes, one time I was like, hey, I'm going to just be super open with everyone. Here's a situation. And literally, this is 2009, I think. I walked by someone's, like half the people were on monster.com, like back in the day, because they heard me say, we're done. And I was trying to say, let's get together, let's work hard, let's figure out
And
a way
what they
out of
heard
this.
is the ship is sinking, jump
Right.
off the ship.
And so then it's okay, that didn't work.
That's
like
so funny.
you almost like you have these ideas like, ooh, this would be great because I'd want to know that now's the time to dig in. But what they hear is, I need to make my mortgage. This guy just telling me we might not be able to do it here. Uh-oh. And so how do you...
That is interesting. I have a long time. I don't like really, I call them partners, or I don't like saying I'm somebody's boss. I like to say we work together.
Yeah.
That's always, even my mom and dad who owned a business, I was always very inclusive, and I can't build a home without my trade partners.
Right.
And I'm very passionate about that. So I try to affect my language. And and I just thought of something. My daughter the other day asked me, or my kids said, Dad, is mom your boss? I'm like, yep, yes,
100%.
Yep, that's true. There's no
Yeah.
team there. No, just kidding. But where I was going with this was empowering your team, but showing them enough so they can see the common goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of culture and sharing it. But I've been very fortunate that two of some of my best employees and people that I work with are former business owners. And so they get it. I've one in particular, he ran a framing company for 20 years.
Wow.
He had him and his brother ran their own company. And then his body was like, I don't want to do this for another 20, 30 years. And I said, so you're coming to work with me. We got to be my project manager and and he's great. But he does understand payroll. He does understand running a business. He does understand all that. And so I think that's a rare hire, because it's not very often that someone who owns a business also it'd be difficult. I honestly don't know if I could work for somebody else.
Right. You couldn't now.
No.
I couldn't either. I'd be the worst employee
Well,
ever.
I thought about a couple of years ago, there was some, I don't know, maybe I think right before the podcast, I was pretty burned out. I've spoken about it a little bit on the podcast, and I needed the podcast for me it was like donkey label. It was the thing that really got me excited. I just needed a shot of it. Now I'm ready for the back 40. I'm all re-energized about building and where it's going and what we're doing. It's not that I didn't love building. It was like, I'd been doing it for 20 years. Like, I know how to do it. It was, I need to scratch a different itch.
Yeah.
And
I think that's about the learning curve. So for me, when I think about why I do some things, like I learned about how garments are made.
Oh, garments.
Yeah.
I thought you'd been garment
well,
watches.
No. Well, like you podcast, you had to figure all this stuff out. Oh, now I'm worrying about, your brain needs that sharp point of the learning curve. And I think that's also why you maybe go from running to bike, because gear, and what about
100%.
And I think that's the humans that we are, which is the curious builder. You're curious, and then you take the next step. So some people are curious and stop.
Most, I would say most.
I'm going to do it. Yeah. And I know that I'm going to be really bad and, to your point, fail. But it's not really failure, because you're learning, and you're to me, that's where I get the most joy in life, is the steep part of the learning curve. I think you've done triathlon, like swimming.
Yeah.
At 36, I doubled my rate of swimming in a year.
Oh, wow.
Because I was so bad. And it's so much like technique. Like, you can't do that with running. You can't do it with like typing. There's nothing in your life where you can get twice as good at it anymore. And so I think that's like podcasting. You went from 0 to maybe you're only at 60, but that felt good when it re-energized you. And I think that's...
I think we need different things. You hear about burnout, whatever that might be. And I think sometimes, like, I've had people, even about the podcast, that have said it's taking away too much of your attention.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, like, okay, so if I stayed focused on building and burned out in 4 years, or if let's say it takes a day and a half to doing all the things I'm doing a lot more than unfortunately, the podcast was like the gateway drug, 20 other things that I want to do with it, and which I'm really enjoying. But the point of that story is like, but if it allows me to build for 20 more years,
right?
Even if I'm, let's say, it's a bad analogy, but as a builder, let's say I'm 70% efficient, but I'm able to do it for 20 years. So that's way more home business work than I ever would have been able to do. And I think, as going back to the athletic comparisons, I'm 44. I could maybe beat myself. I still am in the window where I could beat what I was before, because you can be more disciplined and you can find different ways to win. But like, to your earlier point, there's 7 guys who could just flat out kill me in anything I wanted that we currently are friends with. Let's forget all the people you don't even know. So you have to make these little games and adjust the metrics. And at the end of the day, ever since the 50 miler that I did this fall, I'd say for the last month and a half, I've been floundering.
Right.
And it wasn't the 50 miler, it was the goal. It was the object. And so now we're doing, I got you roped into it too, along with 7 other people, which is the 75 hard. And it's really just, I need the sense of community. I need something that challenges me, whatever it might be. And that must just be something that's a gear in my brain.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I don't do well at like training for life fitness.
I can't do that.
I need to show up to something that I might get embarrassed at and will not want to get embarrassed. And DL, Donkey Label, helps me because the guy that owns the clothing brand better not be the worst dude that shows up. And so that's like how my mind works. And my wife likes to run and she can do it for a race or she can just do it for health. But I'm like, I need something. And so, yeah,
it's like testing yourself.
Yeah. But I think that's business, right? Like business is when you leave high school or college or whatever there's graded, what's the next thing? And like having a job where you have security for some people is great. Like my dad, he couldn't sleep a night if he knew he was a teacher and he's like, I just need to know a paycheck's coming. It's
funny you say that. I have I won't say who they are because they'll know about this, but I know somebody that is taking a pay cut from commission. They're looking to start a family and they want a regular payment because they want and I get it. Like she wants to be a mother. Like I totally understand it. But she's so good at what she does from a commission standpoint because she's just very competitive. I suspect that when she has her family, that she'll probably have to go back because she's just she's so motivated by what could be, which is a great driving motor. But I know I have another person I'm just glad that I can do what I need. We're partners on something and they just love the continuity. And they're like, am I going to still have this job a year from now? I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry that you ever thought that. Are you kidding me? Like you will be helping me run this thing for as long as I run it. I'm sorry that I didn't make that clear. And it was actually a cool moment for me too, because it's more like they wanted to be the team. They wanted to be a part of this. And then but they needed the stability that it wasn't going to be a flash in the pan. I think it goes back to being a leader. I haven't always, even though sometimes you can be a leader, but not act like one, but think like one. I think sometimes leaders fall into this trap of you are a leader because you're leading, but you're not really thinking about leadership. And I think as you get older, certainly now, I do think a little bit differently now. Okay, how can I train people up? And we're such a small team that I'm excited to have more people because nothing would make me happier than to see them advance, either professionally, but personally too. I get really excited when people, when they pick a goal, right? When you see someone that does something that challenges them, I think that's really cool.
Yeah. No, we have a variety of different employee types. What I've found is my interview questions now, I'd almost like to meet their parents because our best employees are that way because they're that way.
Yeah.
Like they don't leave a job site until it's perfect, not because the manager's looking, because they wouldn't sleep at night knowing that thing was offset or that it just wasn't done right. Like they just have personal pride. And other people are like, 5 o'clock, I'm out. And so finding the A's is tough. It's hard to convince a B or a C to be an A. You can't use incentives. Like I've tried it all. And so now I just feel like find those A's and
A's want to work with A's.
Yeah. And then also like the thing that you and I probably both have to work on is when you have a C and you don't let them go, the A's and the B's, why am I doing all this? Because so-and-so is there as a C.
Yep.
And so that's been the one thing I've learned, which is what I thought was me being this great human and not wrecking someone's life by firing them or letting them go was actually a huge negative for the team and holding us all back. And that I needed to say, hey, celebrate the A's. The B's can get to A's and find more A's. And then I read something once that said, even if the A only stays for 2 years, the C would have stayed forever and that would have been worse. The 2 years you get with that A takes your company to the next level. Then it's an exciting place for the next A to come in and spend their 2 years. Like hopefully they stay, but if they leave, don't look at that as a negative. Like they got you further because they were so good.
It's funny you said we had Rob Hull on from JMad Design. He'll air the episode before this one. And he was hired when right out of grad school. I think he was like 22, something like that. And they chose him because he was inexperienced. Yep. He didn't have any habits they had to break, but they just recognized in him the cultural fit and the youth and the forward moving. But a lot of times people say, experience. Like I've often hired and overpaid for really good experience.
I made that mistake too.
I think every entrepreneur makes that mistake. Probably repeated.
Because I shortcut my process
100%.
Like 2 months and then
I've done it twice. One time I did it. I was like, I left them on an island. I just need them to run all the jobs to themselves. And there's a reason they were let go from the other company that I hired them from. And then it turned out, it ran into the ground unsupervised.
Yeah. We just hired this woman, Nellie, who's amazing. And our Donkey Label manager knew her like socially or something. Hey, you should meet this lady. And in the interview, I was like, tell me about your day. She's like, I get up at 4:40, I take a cold shower, and I figure out how I'm going to kick ass. And I'm like,
oh, you're hired.
I was like, done.
Yeah.
Say no more. And she's been amazing.
Wow.
Like,
that was her first thing out of her mouth.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't need to hear anything else. But she goes to CrossFit. Then she comes to work. She wants to get into marketing. She's taking a class at night. We're helping pay for it, but she's just a rock star.
That's the drive.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's because she wants it. And I'm not trying to, I've also made the mistake of seeing people and seeing potential and wanting something more for them than they want.
Yeah.
And not like reading the tea leaves that they're not actually trying to pull this out of desk drawer. They're just like, and so with her, it's like the sky's the limit and it's amazing. And so if you could clone 5 of those people, you take over the world.
I've got one for you, Addison.
All right.
We were talking about him.
Yeah,
but,
perfect.
well, shout out to him. See, he's the secret that shall not be named. To respect your time here, we'll close out. And obviously, for those that are listening, this will air before Sonic Camp. So we've got Donkey Label will be one of our sponsors there, as well as Boot Camp. If you want to meet Paul in person, obviously we'll have everything in the show notes for Donkey Label as well. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say hi to Wesley and Torben if they listen to this episode, my 2 kids.
Oh, they certainly will. Very good. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.